You know, we've had a lot of talk today about the stock market and the economy being so uncertain. Investors are actually, as you mentioned, looking to other asset classes for returns. You know, young investors especially looking to collectibles, not just for the returns, but for the cool factor. And because we all like to invest in things that we love, if you look at the performance this year so far of art, classic cars, wine, watches, jewelry, handbags, whiskey, all those great things, these classes are up double digits, with wine and watches leading the pack up over about 15%. Now, last week I previewed some items from Christie's Luxury Week that's going on this week. It included a pair of Michael Jordan's game-worn 1985 Air Jordan 1 Chicago sneakers. Estimated value there, estimated bids will be between $200,000 and $300,000. You could argue that that year, 1985, marked the birth of what we really now know as collectible sneakers. So even if you don't have $300,000 for Michael Jordan sneakers, there are plenty of other ways to invest in this market. Sharon, as you mentioned, joining me are Jarel Hawkins. He is an early sneaker investor, an entrepreneur, former Senior Vice President of Enterprise Intelligence Automation at Truist. And Christopher Burns, he is a sneaker industry analyst. You heard that right. And a writer and professor. Jarel, Christopher, thank you so much for joining us. Jarel, I want to start with you because this is a market, when we talk about sneakers, that many older traditional investors are still very skeptical of. There's a perception that this is just sort of a product of a giant asset bubble and the pandemic, where people had a lot of money. They were sitting at home trading sneakers. What are you seeing right now in this market in terms of prices, trading volume, and demand?
So one of the keys is you just said it about 1985, with that being, think about it, it was back to the future of finance. There's a financial revolution going on, and footwear has played a key role. You can look at just an auction on one sneaker generated $30 million just for that one shoe that never released to the public. It was just through an auction site. Now, what's beautiful about that is there's still about 10 to 12% of those assets available in the market to get, which a financial advisor can advise their clients on some alternative asset class investing with the right strategies, looking at long-term wealth. Because what I will say is this has been going on. It's not a new thing for COVID and the pandemic. I've been doing it about 20 years, and there's a lot of different components of reselling versus alternative asset investing. Both are needed to keep it going. Like reselling the lost and founds, which were a retro of the 85 shoe that you just said came out. That's actually moving at 100% ROI. But that's focused on churn, which creates capital gains. If you're looking for long-term wealth, there are also some higher value items that will range around $200,000 per shoe. But there is some challenges with risk and compliance. But with emerging technology, that's actually becoming less of a factor. But really, the focus is going to be real relationships, managing those to reduce risk. And the barriers of entry are changing now. Now you can invest in fractional parts of assets. So don't think it's a bubble. Really think it's just getting started and really going to become a core of diversifying your portfolio in a fun and cool way.
So I want to get back to that difference between reselling and investors and investing in a second, but just to put a pin on that. So right now, in terms of prices on StockX and these various trading sites, do you see any categories that are weakening? You know, in the watch market, we're starting to see some of those really high flyers, the Rolexes, the Audemars Piguet, the Richard Milles, they sort of come down 20, 25% in price over the past few months. You're not seeing any of that correction in sneakers or with even some of those top flyers?
No, so we are seeing correction in the market. Example is Nike SBs. Nike SBs, there was a big movement into, I would call it a re-retro. Where they went from, if it was a high top shoe, it went to a low top, and then a low top to a high top. And then there was a craze that was created within the pandemic with Nike SBs. They are actually on a decline recently. Just the orange lobsters for concepts was Retro, which is a colorway that actually has 5 more colorways that were ahead of it. Those were going for around 1,500 to 3,000. Right now, that new release this week is actually only going for around 600 to 700. So a significant drop. But there are other focuses that do not release to the public. And that's where I specialize in is, okay, where are those non-public releases, those non-IPOs that are private? Those are actually ticking up because that's where the wealth is being generated versus generating capital through reselling.
Got it. And Christopher, you're our data guy, so you dig really deep into the data and the trading volumes. What are you seeing right now with prices and trading volume, and especially as it compares to the peak, let's say, a year or a year and a half ago?
Well, what you have is a situation, if you begin to sit down and look at the data, resale is trending down, which is why Jarel is focused on the investment side of it. But by my data, when I go in and do this research, I'll go to StockX, I'll go to eBay, and I'll scrape the data, compile it, and put it out. So if you go to the website and you read these articles, over the last year, specifically, I just did a report on Black Friday, and I used eBay's data. And eBay from Black Friday, from that morning to Saturday night on eBay, if you search the keyword sneakers, you find a $2 million decrease year over year for Black Friday from last year to this year. So I did another set of data earlier in the year at the slowest time for sneaker sales, which is April and May. And in April and May, the exact same decrease was seen on eBay. But you have to take that with a grain of salt because data across various platforms is different. But overall, it's been trending down. And a lot of the sales from eBay have shifted to StockX. So because StockX is now taking a lot of those sales, it looks like StockX is kind of growing in that more people are getting involved. And the fact is more people are getting involved. But what's happened is StockX has kind of democratized the whole process of resale. And this is causing margins to fall. So when Jarel talks about the orange lobster SB that dropped, the interest across the board is decreasing on a lot of different models because there are so many releases now. So when Nike is deciding to, and Nike drives the market, when Nike decides to release a bevy of product and people are becoming frustrated with the release situation, which is something we probably need to get into, and that's about the acquisition of these sneakers. When a lot of this product is coming into the market, people are starting to become more patient. So if you're going to look into this, you really need a guide, someone who's paid attention to the market, that understands it explicitly, because the market is trending down. And it's not because it was a bubble. There are a lot of different factors that are kind of taking place in sneaker resale that you have to consider. And I know we don't have a whole lot of time, so we won't get into that. But overall, the market is trending down.
And Jarel, to that point about the releases, I mean, this is one of the fundamental questions people have about sneakers as a collectible. I understand why a Picasso is worth what it's worth. He's not painting any more paintings. I understand why a Ferrari GTO is worth $50 million. They're not making any more of those GTOs. They made 36 of them. The sneaker market, you're talking about a giant manufacturing company that can produce endless numbers of sneakers and retros and versions. And so how do you differentiate what is a collectible sneaker and what is something that is really just a commodity that's a retail product that will decline in value over time, especially if you wear it?
Absolutely. So the great piece about that is really having folks who've been embedded and ingrained in that culture understand that the sneaker market follows a regular cycle. It's not like there's a Jordan 3 that released now that we haven't seen before, unless it comes out in a new colorway. The model is still really the same. But to your reference to Picasso, rest in peace to the late Virgil Abloh, there's a collection of off-white Nikes that had came out that didn't come to the public, that went only 200 pair in the world were created, that went directly into auction. that average around 175,000 per shoe. So 200 in the marketplace. So what's that? A market cap of around, I don't know, 28 to 38 million dollars, and those are still being invested in, but only 10% of them are available in the market to buy right now. So there's wealth that's being held and generated in a different tier of shoes. We're not talking about just the regular shoes that go into Foot Locker, like the Panda Dunks. The Panda Dunks released, and there were 200,000 sold just on the StockX platform that generated an ROI, well, not an ROI, but a revenue of about 33 million. One of the key pieces with that is just through the fees, there was about a 2.9 to $3 million that would go back. So investing in the sneaker market, you can do it directly into the asset, but you also can do it indirectly, because all of those fees that were processed actually is through a publicly traded company. So I advise on looking at it and diversifying across the sneaker ecosystem, not just the physical asset.
Yeah, and Christopher, I wonder, for those who are not well versed in sneaker culture, but really want to sort of dabble in this game as a diversification play, they see these values go up, they see the popularity going up, they see that this generation of, let's say, 20, 30-something investors will continue to bid up the prices because, you know, whether you look at cars, watches, wine, we all collect later in life what we loved as a 16-year-old. And this is, you know, sneakers are part of that culture for this next generation of investors. Are there 2 or 3 models of sneakers that an investor could buy right now for not a lot of money that will likely at least hold their value, maybe go up a little bit? Or is there a fund that you would suggest for people, again, they don't want to spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on a pair of sneakers, but they kind of want to play in this market? What would your advice be for an entry-level amount of investment?
Because it's such a learning curve with sneakers, and you really have to understand what you're doing, StockX has kind of eliminated that process of education and learning about the culture, and it's made it easier for people to jump in. But if someone's going to get into the market, I release a data report, and I just put one out 2 days ago for anyone that wants to sell sneakers on Amazon. That's a list of things that you can buy quickly if you go out and you do basically retail arbitrage. But for a shoe that's going to hold its value, when you analyze the sneaker market, you have to realize that the closer that Nike gets to the consumer, so the consumer direct acceleration previously, the consumer direct offense, Nike is opening another 30 stores this year. The closer Nike gets to their consumer, the more likely they'll utilize what's called edit to amplify to deliver the product directly to the marketplace where they're sitting in a brick and mortar location. This means that a shoe that potentially would have held value for 10, 15 years, if Nike recognizes through their own research, because inside of their ecosystem, inside of Nike.com, in the Nike app or the Swoosh app or the Sneakers app, inside of these apps, the customer spends 3 times as much money. As they learn more about that customer and they get closer to that customer, the value of these things is not going to maintain because they will re-release items. A perfect example of that is the Big Bang LeBron, or it's an orange LeBron that came out, I think it was 2012. And that shoe was reselling for about $1,500. You could have held it and it would have done well. Nike re-retroed that shoe. Cars, purses, Hermes, handbag, cars, when they're made, it's finite. Sneakers, anything can be recreated, and Nike is showing that they're willing to go back and recreate some of their best sneakers. If you're going to get into the marketplace, it's best to come in, connect with a person who's in that marketplace, that knows it, and work with an individual versus attempting to navigate those waters by yourself, because you can find yourself in a position where you're taking your money and you're deciding to put it into an asset. And if Nike decides to re-release that product, it's not going to have the same value anymore. Now, that's not talking about something that's signed. That's not talking about something that's signed. Or
Right.
what Jarel's
Right.
talking about
Of
with the
course.
Off-White collection. Those are so limited in scope. The idea
Yeah.
of you
Yeah,
attaining one
those
or
are-
a lay
yeah, those
person
are
is
clearly-
just difficult.
Yeah, those are clearly collectibles. Jarel, I want to ask you, since you've been collecting sneakers for a long time, what is the best investment you've ever made in sneakers? And what is the most expensive or highest value sneaker that you hold, pair of sneakers that you hold right now?
So the best investment I've made, to what Chris said, is relationships. You really reduce risk in this market through relationships. There are folks I met waiting in line, and we still trade and look out for each other day to day. So highest value, I would say, looking at capital wise, I would say it's a Supreme Dunk High that I acquired from going physically. Those weren't released online when it was there. I actually got those from Shibuya when I went over to Tokyo specifically for that trip. And that's the highest value, and the value is going to continue to go up and grow. But I may trade it off for some other assets that I think are going to have a multiplier effect on it.
And Christopher, last word for investors out there, what do you think is going to be the best investment in terms of holding value, or a model right now that you see out there that you think is undervalued that people should be aware of?
In sneakers, right?
Yep.
All right. What's undervalued that will go up, surprisingly enough, is the Nike Zoom GT Cut Olympic, because that shoe was supposed to release in 2020. But with the pandemic and the Olympics being moved back to 2021, and not a lot of those shoes were made available, Nike has not re-released that shoe in the last year and a half or so, and they moved on to the GT Cut 2. That GT Cut,
All right.
which is a $160 basketball shoe, is now at about $300, and I think it's going to go up a little bit more. But there's some other things that are out there that you could possibly do that would be a much better look for you. But I guess we could talk about that later.